As a security guard, my job often led me into the depths of the unknown. Nothing could have prepared me for the chilling encounter that happened one night at an abandoned hospital. To give you some background, I am a 28-year-old guy that became a security guard 2 months before this incident happened. I am not that strong but needed any job that I could get at this period in my life. It was around 2 in the morning, and the air was thick with an unsettling stillness as I went on my routine patrol of the desolate building. The hospital stood as a decaying relic of the past, with a structure that loomed over me as I walked around. As I made my rounds, the soft glow of my flashlight cast eerie shadows on the crumbling walls, illuminating the forgotten remnants of a place long abandoned. Each step I took seemed to echo through the empty halls, amplifying the sense of solitude that hung heavy in the air. Suddenly, a faint sound caught my attention, a series of rhythmic footsteps echoing from the far end of the corridor. My heart skipped a beat as I strained to listen, my senses on high alert for any sign of intruders or trespassers. With cautious steps, I ventured further into the darkness, the beam of my flashlight cutting through the shadows. The footsteps grew louder, drawing me closer to the source, until I reached a connection where the hallway branched off into 2 separate paths. The decision weighed heavily on me as I hesitated, torn between the instinct to retreat and the duty to confront whatever lurked beyond. Steeling my nerves, I chose the path to my right, my footsteps echoing with the mysterious sounds that I followed. As I rounded the corner, the footsteps abruptly ceased, leaving me standing alone in the suffocating silence. I scanned the empty corridor, my senses on high alert for any sign of movement, but there was nothing, no trace of the unseen presence that I had heard. Just as I was about to dismiss it as a trick of the mind, a chill ran down my spine as I caught sight of a shadowy figure darting across the hallway, disappearing into the darkness. My breath caught in my throat as I struggled to make sense of what I had just witnessed, my mind trying to understand what I just saw. Summoning every ounce of courage, I advanced cautiously, my heart pounding in my chest as I approached the spot where the figure had vanished. The air hung heavy with anticipation as I braced myself for the unknown, my senses heightened to the slightest movement or sound. But as I reached the spot where the shadow had disappeared, there was nothing, no trace of its presence, no evidence of what I saw. I stood there stunned in silence, grappling with the unsettling realization that I was not alone in the abandoned hospital. With trembling hands, I reached for my radio, my voice shaking as I called for backup, desperate for the reassurance of human contact. The static crackled to life, but before I could utter a word, a sudden gust of wind extinguished my flashlight, making everything around me go dark. Panic surged through me as I fumbled for the backup flashlight at my belt, my hands shaking with adrenaline-fueled fear. With a trembling click, the beam pierced the darkness once more, revealing the empty corridor stretching out before me, devoid of any trace of the shadowy presence that had eluded me. As I stood there in the eerie silence, a sense of foreboding washed over me, like a cold hand grasping at my neck. I looked behind me quickly, trying to catch what I kept messing with. I didn't see anything in the darkness. I knew then that I had stumbled upon something beyond my comprehension. I turned and ran out of the hospital as quickly as I could. I don't know who or what I saw there, and I never want to know. To this day, the memory of that night haunts me. Sometimes I can still feel the cold hand press my neck and I get chills thinking about it. Although I may never fully understand what I encountered in the abandoned hospital, I hope to never have to experience something like that again. The moon hung low in the sky, casting an ethereal glow over the dense forest surrounding the remote campground where I worked as a security guard. It was the kind of night that sends shivers down your spine, with the wind whispering through the trees and total darkness. I've been working as a security guard for almost a year now, and I've gotten used to it. As I settled into my security booth, nestled deep in the heart of the woods, I couldn't shake the feeling of unease that seemed to permeate the air. The silence was deafening, broken only by the occasional rustle of leaves and the distant hoot of an owl. Little did I know, this night would soon unravel into a chilling tale I would never forget. I glanced at the clock, noting the late hour, and turned my attention to the bank of surveillance monitors in front of me. Each screen displayed a different section of the campground, illuminated by the soft glow of the moonlight. Despite the tranquility of the scene, a sense of foreboding gnawed at the pit of my stomach. Minutes turned into hours as I sat vigilantly, my eyes scanning the screens for any sign of trouble. But as the night wore on, a strange sensation washed over me, a feeling of being watched. I shook my head, feeling paranoid, and forced myself to focus on the task at hand. That's when I heard it, a faint, haunting laughter echoing through the darkness. At first, I dismissed it as a trick of the wind, but as the laughter grew louder and more insistent, I realized it was coming from somewhere within the campground. My heart raced as I listened, the hairs on the back of my neck standing on end. It was a chilling sound, unlike anything I had ever heard before. Summoning every ounce of courage I possessed, I stepped out of the security booth and into the cool night air. The laughter seemed to surround me, coming from all directions at once, making it impossible to pinpoint its origin. With trembling hands, I gripped my flashlight tightly and ventured deeper into the campground, the beam of light cutting through the darkness like a beacon of hope. The trees loomed overhead, their twisted branches casting eerie shadows on the forest floor. As I navigated the winding paths, the laughter grew louder, echoing through the trees with an otherworldly intensity. My pulse quickened with each step, my senses heightened to the slightest movement or sound. Suddenly, I froze, my breath catching in my throat as I caught sight of a figure standing amidst the trees. It was barely more than a shadow, its features obscured by the darkness, but there was no mistaking the malevolent aura that surrounded it. For a moment, I hesitated, unsure of what to do. But then, as if sensing my presence, the figure turned its gaze toward me, its eyes gleaming with an otherworldly light. My blood ran cold as I met its gaze, a primal fear coursing through my veins. Without a word, the figure vanished into the night, leaving me standing alone in the silence of the forest. Trembling with adrenaline, I stumbled backward, my mind reeling with disbelief. What had I just witnessed? Was it a trick of the light, or something far more sinister? As I made my way back to the security booth, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had stumbled upon something beyond my imagination, a presence lurking in the shadows, watching and waiting. I wonder if that figure made those laughing sounds I heard. I questioned this experience the whole night and a few days after. I rarely think back to this moment, and have never experienced anything like it since. Every night, as a security guard in the heart of the city, I experienced the solitude that came with my job. I was the only one working in the building, and that came with long hours. I have only met 2 other security guards from working here. The high-rise office building I patrolled stood around 25 stories tall, its windows reflecting the glow of the city lights. One particular evening, as I made my rounds through the empty corridors, a sense of unease settled over me. The building seemed different somehow, the air heavy with an unspoken tension that gave me chills. Ignoring the feeling, I continued my patrol, my footsteps echoing softly against the polished marble floors. As I reached the upper floors, I couldn't shake the sensation of being watched. It was as if unseen eyes followed my every move, their gaze piercing through the darkness. I tried to brush it off as my imagination was running wild, but deep down, I knew something wasn't right. It was then that I saw it, a movement in the reflection of one of the office windows. My heart skipped a beat as I turned towards the glass, my breath catching in my throat. There, staring back at me, was a figure, a tall, dark silhouette. I froze, unable to tear my gaze away from what I was seeing. Its presence seemed to fill the room, suffocating me with a sense of dread that clung to the air like a heavy fog. With trembling hands, I reached out to touch the glass, half expecting the figure to vanish into thin air. But as my fingers made contact with the cold surface, the figure remained, its empty eyes boring into mine with an intensity that sent a chill down my spine. Panic surged through me as I stumbled backwards, my heart pounding in my chest. I tried to rationalize what I was seeing, searching for a logical explanation to calm my racing thoughts. Perhaps it was a trick of the light, or a figment of my overactive imagination. But deep down, I knew there was something more. Summoning every ounce of courage I had, I forced myself to approach the window once more, determined to confront whatever lurked on the other side. As I drew closer, the figure seemed to waver, its form flickering like a candle in the wind. I pressed my hand against the glass, the cold surface sending shivers down my spine. And then, in an instant, the figure vanished, leaving behind nothing but the empty reflection of the office interior. I stood there for what felt like an eternity, trying to make sense of what had just happened. Had I imagined the whole thing? As the night wore on, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, that unseen eyes followed my every move, lurking in the shadows just out of sight. Every creak of the floorboards, every whisper of the wind, sent a jolt of fear coursing through my veins. But despite my growing unease, I refused to let fear consume me. With each step I took, I pushed back against the darkness, determined to uncover the truth behind the ghostly reflection that haunted me. In the days that followed, I couldn't shake the memory of that night, the figure looming in the darkness, its empty eyes burning into mine with an intensity that left me shaken to the core. Try as I might, I couldn't find a logical explanation for what I had seen, leaving me with more questions than answers. But one thing was certain. There was something lurking in the shadows of the office building, something that defied explanation,